a table. And that continues on slide 16. So you've studied intently, you've worked really hard, you've read the PMBOK cover to cover, you've poured through the IBM study notes, you picked up that book I recommended, and you've taken practice test after practice test, and you're ready to take the exam. So on the day of the exam, it's important that you have eaten a good breakfast, only do a little bit of study the night before so that you don't, drive yourself crazy. When you get there, you will need to show your ID that matches the name that you put in on the application. It's also pretty important that you don't eat or drink a lot. All of your bio breaks are actually on your 4-hour clock to take the test. So you want to kind of limit the amount of intake that you have prior to the test. And you are given, you're basically set in a room with terminals like cube style. So if you're easily distracted, you might want to bring a pair of earplugs. You're given 4 pieces of scratch paper. If you need more paper, you have to relinquish 1 piece. So I always tell people that as part of your learning, when you get there, you're going to have the opportunity to do what I call a brain dump. Don't write too big, or else you might have to surrender some of your notes that you've put down on paper. You also can use the pieces of paper maybe to keep track of questions that you want to go back to, although you can do this within the online tool in the test. You may want to just write it down for your own memory, like what did I answer for that question, so that you can just kind of go back and reference it if you need to within the test. And this is also a very important note here, also on slide 17. When you sit down, you're given 15 minutes to take the online tutorial on how to use the test application. It won't take you 15 minutes. You have the option to start the test right away when you're done with that tutorial, or you can let the clock count down itself and the test will start for you. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you do not start the test immediately, but rather take that opportunity of leftover time where you can do your brain dump. Write down all the formulas you needed, write down the knowledge areas for initiating and closing that you memorized, write down any other things that any mnemonic devices like, spelling words that you've memorized to help you remember things along the way. Write it all down, because this is going to allow you to just feel an enormous weight off your shoulder and just really concentrate on the test. Again, just be mindful of the fact that when it does finish counting down, your test begins, so look up every once in a while to make sure that you haven't missed the test start. Again, you have 1 minute 20 seconds per question, which sounds like a little, but really is a lot. I also recommend highly that if you're a fast reader, that you slow yourself down. Key words that could make or break the answer, like all of the above, included, should not, key qualifiers and sentences you may skip over. So read things very carefully. You can go back and mark them for review later. If you skip a question, it will come up at the end and show you that you skipped 6 questions. You want to go back and answer them. You should answer everything. If the clock is counting down and you still have 10 questions but only a couple seconds left, just choose B for all of them, because if you have a wrong answer, if you have a no answer, it's automatically wrong. And statistically, the answer B as in boy is the one that's most correct. I don't know, some genius probably figured that out. But, so if you're under the gun, you have a lot of questions left, but not a lot of time left, just hit B for all of them, and you have a 25% chance of being correct. If you can take a break along the way, you may want to do so. But again, you really need to judge your time. If you're halfway through the test and it's only 1 hour into it, you've got plenty of time to take a stretch break. If you don't, you just got to keep plugging through it. At the end of the 4 hours, your test will be submitted automatically for grading. You have no control over it, so you definitely want to watch that clock. Once it goes out to be scored, it seems like the most horrible part of your life, because the whole screen goes blank and you're like, uh-oh, what happens? but then it'll come up and it'll tell you if you passed or failed. And if you've passed, you get a stamp from the proctor who's facilitating the exam, your project management profession. You will receive your PIN and your certificate in the mail, and you can now call yourself a project management professional and move on to your next phase of certification, which will be IBM certification. Your PMP credential is good for 3 years. And if at that point you want to maintain the PMP credential, you need to do your recertification, which is basically education and some give back, which is very easy to do in 3 years. It is an important note here that you don't necessarily have to have your PMP credential in good standing to go for your IBM certification. And what that means is basically a lot of people go out and they get their PMP credential, but then it's another 4 years or 5 years before they ever get their IBM certification. And in that time, you know, they didn't want to pay the renewal fee. It's okay. Obviously, you can't call yourself a PMP, but it's not required that you're an active PMP to be IBM certified, if that makes sense. As long as you have had it in your history somewhere that you passed the test, it's okay not to keep it up if you don't want to. Although there are several advantages to keeping it up, and if you let it lapse in the 3rd year, if you want it ever again, you have to retake the test. So definitely something to consider. So I've given you a ton of information. It is a lot to take in, but all the slides that I've presented do have a lot of good information. So Vince, at this time, why don't we go ahead and open it up for some questions?